taken away, ripped from your nomadic lands, your traditions wiped away, brought into the Soviet Union after you've kidnapped your wife. But for me, as an idiot,
Ronald Reagan, a liberal,
I
but
call him a communist personally, but sure, we can use
okay.
liberal. Most of the local businesses are run through TikTok and Instagram. That's correct.
What?
Marrying into a bean-selling family.
I'm Sam, and this is Illegitimate Scholar, a weekly anthropology podcast that operates outside of the restrictions of mainstream academia. Here we make sense of our senseless world through open discussion of difficult and taboo topics and a love of the human spirit. Today, I talk to Rogue Philosopher, a man about my age who moved to the other side of the world from New Jersey to Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. He claims it's perfect for traditional Americans, and after hearing what he has to say, I tend to agree with him. I love this conversation, and I hope you will too.
So, Rogue, you are from Jersey, and you live now in Central Asia, right?
Yes, sir. Born in Jersey, grew up in Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. Wasn't too fond of the modern industrialized U.S., so first I headed off into the jungles of Vietnam, and now I'm currently based as a Central Asia as a professor. We teach a very mixed blend of humanities and literature here. So typically you can think of it as just American literature, but our objective is mostly to teach the local population Western styles of thinking and logic, or in my terms, preferably Nietzsche or Ted Kaczynski. Could be both.
And why Central Asia?
Do you remember that time when we had that giant global lockdown and everybody was forced to get
Safe and effective happy medicine.
I was living on the Chinese border of Vietnam. And when you're on the Chinese border and a pandemic breaks out, you tend to get a little bit nervous. And you tend to look into things a little bit too much. And you tend to try to avoid any place where this could potentially be an issue. And I noticed that Central Asia was the only location on Earth where it seemed to be freed of this collective agreement, let us say. And I immediately, as fast as I could, wandered on over here with a bunch of my friends. We all scattered in a variety of directions. Now we lay low, trying to survive.
But why do you have to lay low?
I really just don't agree with any sort of progressive tyranny that's washing over Western systems. I want to be in a place where I'm not regulated by a government. Now, what that means is I don't want to be forced to do anything. I don't want to be forced to participate in any sort of, let's say, medical-induced activities. The local people are very against this sort of thing, and that's really the main reason I moved out here.
Central Asia is like, it's a group of countries between like China and Russia and the Middle East. So it's like the Stans, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. They all have a somewhat similar culture, and it's a similar geographic area.
We seem to have a very similar story where we were cozied in with academia in some respect and then sort of had a divorce there. And I was curious if perhaps you might be an individual who could help me revitalize the traditional American philosophy. I'm very curious on this whole idea of modernity. I don't know, the America of the modern day seems so distant from what we used to be. You know, you come over, break away from Europe, you have your independent, self-sufficient communities, and you try to produce everything that you can. Even when I live out with the tribes, okay, we try to produce everything that we can, maybe we trade, but now we're all living in these cities, and it seems we all have these terrible crises of meaning. All of our definitions have been inverted. So the focus of my work is really to sort that out. What is the American identity, and how can one perhaps reject modernity to return to a more traditional space? And that's what's led me to try to live with these more, let's say, remote or tribal cultures. Now, the idea of my work is I just teach mostly literature. We're going through lots of fun stories. We start with the base of literature. We just got finished doing Kafka, and we're learning about this idea of transformation, the different kinds of, let's say, psychological changes that one could have, and certain negative philosophies you might want to expel. For example, the philosophy of resentment has a tendency to grip an individual when they're least expecting it. And what we do is we study this idea of negative transformation moving into a positive. So we'll be finishing up our studies with Nietzsche's Overman, and thus spoke Zarathustra. And what I'd really like to do is I'd like to come out to these spaces and I'd like to say, all right, you guys have just been introduced to the modern world in the 1900s when Russia colonized you and came in. You were taken away, ripped from your nomadic lands, and then brought into the Soviet Union. All of your traditions wiped away. Now we're Soviet people. But then the Soviet Union collapses. Oh my God, 1991. And now you're free people. We live in a democracy. What does that mean? What's your role, child, in a democracy? Where is it that you want to go? Are you sure that you want to continue to forsake all of your traditions, or do we want to go back to the steppe and reclaim our traditions somehow? So that's what my students and I are really focused on. What does their
Okay,
identity
right.
want to be?
So that's interesting, but that in connection with the context of how they're living. What is their like life like? What is like where do they live? What kind of foods are they eating? What ages are they? What
My
is the
students are just
context in
typical
which they're
city
reading?
children. I mean, we live here in the remnants of the dystopian capital city over here in Kyrgyzstan, and they live as typical children in the US or New York City might, aside from the liberal propaganda of the Western nations. So they're growing up in the remnants of cities. I can see beyond me, we've got all these beautiful Soviet disheveled apartments with our asbestos roofs collapsing. These are my kids here. And we're trying to figure out what they want to do. Do they want to go over to Russia, immigrate there, bring back some money at home? Do we want to build architecture, live like civilized people? I try to encourage my kids to go back on the steppe and live like what they call the Kochevnik, which are the nomadic peoples. That's more my focus.
Have
But
any of them done that? Have any of them
unfortunately,
lived?
no, they have
None of them have
not.
spent any time with nomads.
See, this is my problem because I live in a nomadic society on paper, but they never practice what they preach. They too are being invaded by modernity, and I have to try to educate them to fight back against these sort of
How many
influences.
generations in cities are these kids? Like are these like multi-generational? Are some of these people, do some of them have parents or even grandparents maybe that were nomads?
For my children, no. I have to go pretty far out into the countrysides to find them. I thought, you look at somewhere on paper and you think, my God, they have nomads. That's a certain percentage of the population. I think it's 64% on paper still live out in these outback regions. But then you get here and everything's all wrong. Oh my God, it turns out we're not good at keeping records very much. So no, they've been removed from their land for about 100 years, I would suspect, most of my
Wow.
students. And it's really
Yeah.
unusual to see because you have this sort of in the West, we have all these systems of logic, right? That's kind of our main thing with the Enlightenment. We have these really rational, logical ways of going about the world. But if you come around people here, there's sort of a big difference. I know even with my people, I believe they only invented the idea of writing in an organized manner in about 1916 or something like that. And you can see they don't really have that same cognitive capacity that one might have, particularly for the arts or literature and humanities. And they're also very relaxed as well.
What are their like religious beliefs, or is it not like an explicit thing like that?
Well, I'd say their religion's the Soviet Union. That would be their
Okay.
religion. They're really
Right.
focused on reviving this Soviet time, and our hands were together. We were saying kumbaya. The big brother Russia was here to protect us from everything. And I would say the reason that that is their religion is because, again, they were living out in the steppe here. And then the Russians, the Soviets come in and they force them to be a civilized people. So it's kind of like their first nation. It's kind of like the building of Rome for them. So these people, Central Asians primarily, over in, let's say, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbek, Kyrgyz, and Kazakh, they're all Muslims on paper, but they're not exactly practicing Muslims of any kind. It's the same thing where they're kind of pretend Muslims, much as we are pretend Christians in America. But what they're
Right.
really interested in is this rebirth of let's say, mid-1900s kind of ethos, much like most TradCon accounts are on the internet here.
So are most of these city kids speaking in the same language as the people on the steppe?
Now, in terms of their language, it's also interesting because we have this big debate here. Do we want to stay as Russian speakers? Do we want to try to move more into local dialect speakers? I believe most of the people throughout this region do speak Russian. But some are trying to, I guess they have this point of contention where they want to make Kyrgyz more of the focus of language in schools. That's a law that we have here with the local language. I'd say most people speak a mixture of the two. I myself am going to force my children to learn the local language, of course. I would never do such a thing. But my children, of course, are doing English in the local language as an absolute methodology. Mostly
So
in the
what do their
countrysides,
parents
they'll
speak
speak
then?
this.
And how many languages do their parents speak?
Everybody here will speak a local language, and they'll also speak Russian. The schools, they grew up in literally Stalin schools. They still have that system of education today, so they'll also learn Russian. Mostly the colonists that came here in the 1800s Did they exhibit any ethnic cleansing? Yes, in the sense that their basically entire nomadic people were genocided and forced to go into the mountains into Xinjiang, China in 1916. That was our big genocide here. But it's always a blend and a battling between the two, I would say. And again, we're trying to reclaim our original ethnic identity, or at least the original one of my students is the focus. But we're always battling something.
Is that something that was pre-existing, or is that like something that you personally have brought up in them?
I try to bring that up as much as humanly possible. I really don't like the idea of taking this beautiful, pristine population and just destroying it again and again and again. How many times do we want to be colonized by something? Sure, you had the Russians come in for a period of years. That was their empire. But now you're free of Russian influence. Oh, so we're going to be a democracy and just being taken over by the West? Or what about China? Is the Chinese influence go? Why don't we try to focus on you figuring out what your identity should be based on your own customs and tradition? And this is the approach I take with most all countries that I work in. Let's focus on you being your exact nation and traditions rather than some kind of modern person. Because in modernity, we have this thing where we all just become the same gray mass. If I hang out with anybody in America, they're going to be wearing blue jeans. If I go to Korea, you're going to be wearing blue jeans. I don't see any reason why blue jeans should be worn in the Vietnamese by the Vietnamese people or by our Kazakh or Kyrgyz people. I think even it comes down to the clothing as well being erased. This force of modernity, specifically this sameness coming over us, is what I try to rebel against.
Right.
What we've got here is we've got up until the late 1800s, we were completely a nomadic people. We were divided into about 40 different blood tribes that were united several hundred years ago by a guy named Manas. And they were completely living out in the steppe. Now, how you live in the steppe region itself here, is a bit of a mix of a desert tundra. So we have this desert, thinking as in just like a wasteland as a desert, not so much as the sand dune kind, very minimal resources. And at little valleys between the mountains, you'll have a plains field, which is very rare. 98% of our land is mountainous. 2% is sort of plains land. That's where all of us live. That's where our cities are located. Now, you might be thinking, how would you live here? Well, what you do is you are up in the mountains grazing most of your sheep or goats a majority of the year, and you'll move between valley peaks about every 3 months. That's our system of rotational crop grazing. You're moving from valley to valley in 3-month periods. So in a sense, they're semi-nomadic even to this day, moving between these specialized selected areas. And that's how they would survive until the colonization.
So their traditional beliefs, of course, now their generations detached from their traditional beliefs, right? And their traditional beliefs are tied in with the lifestyle of nomadism, but everything they know and everything their grandparents know is now sedentary. So yeah, it's been forced upon them, but that's the reality of where they are right now. So what is practically like, how do they, like, unless they're going to go fully native and go back and join the nomads entirely, but that's the equivalent.
That's what I recommend.
I mean, you can join the Amish too. I mean, I don't think it's that realistic, right?
That is a majority of my message, I believe, taking the Amish pill. Yes. Now, I do have some individuals in my network that have done such a thing, and I do find that that is the most virtuous way to live. I'm grappling with it currently on a logical mechanism to return to these traditional styles of living. Most people look at the Amish and they think, oh my God, I can never get rid of electricity. But these people, they have all organic foods, they make everything themselves, and they have the highest birth rates in America. So clearly they must be doing something right. And I do have a variety of friends who defected out to Southeast Asia to literally live in the jungle with nothing.
Yeah, not for me, bro. I like airplanes. Now I almost wish I could, but I think for me, I'd rather just accept acculturation as a force that I grew up in Western society. Has anybody left the city and joined the nomads again?
Now, I would say here they would never do such a thing because they just don't have the skill. Because when you're moving from one empire, nomadic to Soviet to modern, you're basically losing all of your knowledge base. I know a lot of people here that were let's say, going into the collectivized farms under the USSR, they would learn how to use all these different modern equipments, particularly in the form of tractors to plow land. Although at first we did use camels, which I must say, using camels to till soil, probably not the best method, but that's what we had. So, using all these tractors and modern equipment from the Soviets, well, what happens when the Soviet Union collapses? Oh my God, we lost all of our knowledge again. Wow, amazing. So it's basically like a brand new society. They've only been around, I'd say, when did we gain independence? 1991? 1991, I think things really got cooking in about 1996. But I really enjoy exploring all these places, particularly in Armenia as well.
Okay, so wait, before that, so Kyrgyzstan, right? Like when you say it's only been a nation since 1991, what's the, like, it's a collection of 40 tribes, right? So what is a Kyrgyz? Like what holds Kyrgyz people together, and why are they one country? Is there any sort of ethnic, any sort of demographic divide, or is it a homogenous society?
Well, it's certainly a homogenous society in the fact that we all agree to live here together, but I really can't tell. In terms of what holds these people together, we have just our block of land. This is the land that they have, and this is the land that we inhabit. We agree to this border of land. However, if we go to the borders, bordering Uzbekistan, or even with some special ethnicities in China called the Dungans. We've got over here in Tajikistan. Our borders are always very on fire with different conflicts. And the reason that there would be conflict in this nation is because Stalin basically just took a pair of scissors and started carving everything up. So what you'll find if you go to these borders is there's little enclaves. Like we've got a lot of Uzbeks in the southwest, for example. They're not really supposed to be there. And then the Uzbeks have a little bit of our land, as they would call it. And then the Tajiks and us are always kind of fighting on the borders here. So where the real tensions come in, and I guess what makes them more of a cohesive people is we say, this is our border, and this is our land, and we lost some of that land, and we're going to stay here and defend it from the other, let's say, neighboring tribes of these other regions. So it's always a very
Is there active combat?
All the time. Oh my God, all the time. Yes, I can't
really
publicly state that I have a side in this debate, but yes, I know when I got here first originally, I guess something happened with the Tajik Kyrgyz border, and there was a bit of a skirmish down there. I know with the Uzbeks down in this city called Osh, they have, I believe the Americans actually registered them as a hotspot for terrorism at a time. So there's always something going on. And I quite like to live in places with that something, so I can kind of hide within the chaos from a personal strategy. I enjoy being in, I'd say, the most chaotic situations I can imagine. Really make me feel very peaceful.
Okay. So I got a question from JC. So we just talked about how they defend their regional territory. Is there a strong martial culture among the average citizens?
Can we define martial culture?
Like a militarized culture. Is there a sense of duty towards a tribe or to the nation state amongst the younger men?
Now, I'm going to have to tell you a story that I had from this week, because I don't understand how these people function in the modern times. I try to think of them as sort of objectively as kind of like a research project of mine. In a certain sense, I've kind of just threw myself here, and I have to learn everything on the ground. It's not like I can open a book. I can't read Russian or the local language. Everything's kind of firsthand. And what I did last week, I moved here to become a farmer, teacher first, moving into a farmer later, to get my own land. Now, I've only met one individual here. He's from the Netherlands. He's a goat farmer somewhere pretty far out in one of these remote villages. I went over to visit him, and he was explaining to me that he married a local woman. And this is apparently a very big problem for the government. The government didn't like that very much. So he bought about 5 hectares of land with his local wife. And the government said, hey, we don't like you married to a foreigner. We're actually going to take that back now, and you're going to pay us rent to live on your own land. Good luck with that. So that was a fun $300,000 I think he probably about lost. So they could just pick up the land. That was his story. I don't know if I've never heard this before, but they just said, nope, you're not going to marry a foreigner. Sorry, you can rent. But he's got 100 goats there on his leased land. And what he's doing is hurting. Yeah, right. They also put all the journalists that are LGBTQ in jail, which I like too, but talk about that later. So we've got this guy, he's living out here. His dream was to be a farmer, marry a local woman. So he's done, he's living my dream. His land's been confiscated. So I think, oh Christ, that might be a problem. And then as we were talking about his land being confiscated, we see a guy come over the hilltop over there riding a horse with his flock of goats. And he was explaining to me that this man is from a different let's say blood clan or tribe than his wife. His wife is from the south. This fellow's from the north. And because his wife is from the south and they don't want that woman to live in this particular area, they'll come over on his land and they'll just start grazing on it. And then sometimes they'll wake up in the morning and all of their food is gone because their neighbors decided to pick all of their crops that day before they woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Or another time, you might have the mafia sent to you because they don't like where your wife is from, or you don't have the ties to the correct region. And this scares me half to death, but it's what we have to do to survive. So in a certain sense, they are definitely a cohesive group together. But if you are just from this province versus the province below you, there might be a really bad feud there that would entice your neighbors to trespass on your land. And when I suggested, well, can't you just shoot everybody? He said, no, of course not. There's always more of them.
Oh my God, dude. Okay.
Now, I would much rather live here than live by zoning laws in America. I am perfectly fine living on the frontier, but it does bother me.
Yeah. That would bother me as well. Probably a little bit more than you. From JC. Okay. Do they have weights and saunas in these rural mountains?
Yes, they do. They love Russian banyas. That was their favorite thing that they kept with them. I was actually just exploring somewhere on the Chinese border. We had this one town. It's called Kyrgyz. It's between all these weird dirt mounds that they call mountains. I don't know. And I guess this used to be they use the mineral water that comes in, and they make all these different kinds of saunas and banyas and hot spring kind of things out of them. I can't figure it out. But what you'll do is, even in Armenia, this is extremely popular. For example, the Soviets will come in, they'll find a place in the mountains, they'll set up this kind of spa and something like that. And that seems to be the height of the Soviet cultural revolution, I guess they could say. They had a bunch of poets and philosophers of the USSR, where I used to live in Armenia. And I think it's probably the same in all these little enclaves in these different regions. So they are very popular.
Okay, we'll get into that. Interesting.
So the genetics here are my fascination. I found it wonderful. So their genetics are Turkic, which is very different. Turkic. You would call it Asian, but it's not. It's their own sort of thing. And what the local, my history friend over there in the other room, what the historian here would tell me is that individuals first got here by sort of Siberia. They were in a region of northern Siberia. They moved down to Yenisei, and the clans then moved into Central Asia and dispersed in a variety of areas. So our original default genetics are actually orange hair and blue eyes, much like Genghis Khan. And then across time, they've been blended with everything. So you kind of have the people that look generally Mongolian, but they'll have blue or green eyes, and they'll have black hair. But you'll also have different sorts of German colonists came over here in the early 1800s when they were expelled from the Russian sphere, I believe. And you'll also have a variety of Russian colonial groups. However, the clans, the 40 original clans here, they'll mix with each other. That's fine. But what's really interesting is they have this group here called the Tatars. Now, the Tatars are very unique to me because they have, they're basically like the original Aryan people, where they still have blue eyes and sometimes blonde hair. And they're kind of like the Jews in a certain sense, where they're migrating traders. So these Tatars are Muslim, but they have a mastery of trade. And what you'll find is a majority of the largest most successful trading groups throughout this region will all be owned by the same group of individuals, who I find wonderfully interesting. What we have here in the back are traditional yurts. That's how most people would live. Now, these yurts are made out of, mostly on the exterior, you would think of it as sheep wool. That's the more felt feeling on the outside. And with our yurts in particular, I'd suggest bring up a Kyrgyz yurt. We'll start with that stereotype. Just type in a Kyrgyz yurt. I'll walk you through one of these. Here we go. So on the outside here, we've got sheep's wool. That's one of our major products. We've got sheep's wool, cotton, and tobacco, I believe, are some of our top three. They'll make the outside out of sheep's wool. And then inside, traditionally, we don't have any resources here. So instead of using wood framing, they traditionally use bone. Bone, you can't let anything go on the step, whether it's bone or fireplaces will be heated by horse shit. You got your good horse shit brick in the stove to keep you warm in the winter time. These are the kinds of people I usually like to really hang out with. So that's kind of how to make a traditional structure here. Personally, for me, I would have really liked, there's one guy that lives in the city center here. There's a little wooded park area. He lives in a traditional yurt. That's what I planned to do when I came here. I wanted to live in a yurt and take a horse to work every day. But unfortunately, my director said I'm not allowed to ride horses to my job. It's very disappointing.
Okay.
I think so.
I'm just.
So yes, they are falconers.
Yeah, so they are falconers. This is the inside of one. I guess. I mean, that looks like a bar down there, but
yeah, you can make them modernized, of course. I mean, this is all. I see the exterior here is probably plastic or leather.
Yeah, and these are. I mean, this
There
is
you go.
just what happens.
That would be how they used to look in the past. That's what's written in our Epic of Manas. Epic of Manas is kind of like the Odyssey. People here didn't exactly have a written language until the 1900s. They kind of did. They communicated by runes to a certain extent, but they mostly share an oral tradition. And the oral tradition is allegedly 30,000 pages long. So in that particular tradition, it says I believe our founder's name is something like Big Stupid. I believe that's his name in English. I'm not kidding. His name is Big Stupid or Big Nose are the two translations that they use. I can't believe that's a real thing, but that is the name of their founder. And yeah, he said have orange and hair and blue eyes, just like Genghis Khan. And we can see you have these dichotomy of two sorts of people that you might find here. We've got the traditional Mongolian looking stereotype. Then you have Mongolian, but maybe yellow hair, maybe orange, maybe blue eyes.
Okay. All right. So somebody asked this, but I was about to go right into this anyway. So, okay. So you have a woman you want to marry picked out?
Kind of. They have this thing here called Kalim. Kalim is a bridal price. Traditionally,
right. Okay, wait. But do you know her though? Like,
yes, I do know her. We do frequent each other's lives. We're still in the courting phase, but we've known each other for a couple of months, and mostly I'm trying to negotiate with her family marriage deal, which is horribly difficult.
Tell me everything about this courtship, please.
Okay, so we have all these different clans, whatever, and traditionally, you want to learn about Alakachu. You don't want to learn about bridal prices. You want to learn about Alakachu. Okay.
All of it, the whole thing. Actually, start with the traditional. Start with traditionally how this would go. Is there bride stealing there?
Well, hold on. So first of all, it's not called bride stealing. It's called Alakachu. Okay, it's very different.
Okay.
And it's much worse than you think. So what we'd have here, right? You'd have kind of your familial blood clan, another familial blood clan, and you're related to this larger overarching clan who unified under Big Stupid, or Manas, as he's called. I swear to God, that's the translation that I was given. I don't know why that's his name, but that is his name. And we have these people who have been unified under this leader several hundred years ago. And they come together and they agree to be a nation. And they agree that this is our area of land. Now, in between our area of land, we would have, let's say you live in your yurts over here, and you like a nice, stunning gal from a yurt over here. So what you do, of course, is you trot on in to the other tribe, and you ask them, hello, I would like to arrange a marriage with your daughter. And the clan would say, okay, that sounds good. How can we help you? And they'd say, well, I'd really like to Alakachu her. I'd really like to kidnap her in the middle of the night. Could you help me? And if the family accepts, what you do is you have your clan and their clan, and you kidnap the woman together, and you bring her back to live in your home, which is very exciting. And you might think that's very misogynistic, but actually, if a woman is traditionally speaking, if she's on the back of a horse being kidnapped by someone and she can break free and run away, congratulations, you're safe. It's my best iteration of this tradition. So we're very pro-feminism here, as you see. If you're a strong, independent woman, you can prove it in a kind of battle. You're welcome to go free.
Okay. Okay.
Now, this tradition is something that's very controversial. Even me, someone trying to revive all of the traditions of the past for every unique individual nation, I don't know what to think about this, because I don't know why. I've never had to think of kidnapping someone before. I don't know why I would start now. So aside from that tradition, what else do we do? Well, we have this idea of a kalim, or a bridal price. So typically what you would do after you've kidnapped your wife, you would then pay the family, and you would say, thank you very much for raising your daughter. It's excellent that we are now allowed to have her in our group, and we would like to provide you with this kind of dowry of typically in the form of horses or sheep or goats or gold. They love gold here. And that you would give that off to the family and say, thank you so much for helping us with this kidnapping. It was great to do business with you. And then we all part ways. Now, we don't practice that anymore, but some people do still participate in alakachu. And in this sense, what they would do is it's highly illegal now. And if you do kidnap a woman, it's kind of like a divorce where if the woman escapes, I guess she has to pay, the man has to pay 50% of his income for the remainder of his life to this woman.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we actually on the street back here, funny enough, there was the last one happened a couple of years ago. One of the students of the school got kidnapped and tried to be forced into a marriage. So we have security now.
One of the students of your school?
Mhm.
How old was she?
Oh, she probably must have been 17 at the time, I think.
Who'd she get kidnapped by?
One of the other gentlemen around here is very passionate about her. He took a liking to her. So what they do is they stage this big event. Now, this is what I've heard. This is before my time, 1 year before I showed up. So what I've been told. But yeah, I guess what they would do, this particular story I was told, I guess one of the boys took a fancying to her and just got a car and a bunch of big, strong men and kidnapped her and tied her up, threw her in the back of the car, and off they went.
So did he plan that with her or her family?
Now, you are supposed to plan it with your family. That is the nice thing to do. But no, I don't think he did, which is why it was a problem. Again,
That makes sense.
This is a very negative thing to say. Obviously, local people don't like it. I cannot advocate for it either. I can see how it would make life easier sometimes when you're forced to pay $40,000 to marry a woman like I am. But I can't say I agree with such a thing. No.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay. So is this practiced at all amongst the nomads still, though?
I imagine, unfortunately, I can't speak their language, and my historian friend, we have different schedules now, so I can't ask. I don't think it's practiced anymore, and I don't even think it was ever that particularly popular. I mean, this is certainly something that would have been wiped out mostly with the Soviet times. They were very big on eliminating this tradition for obvious reasons. I don't really know much about it personally, and I can't really talk to anybody about it because it's extremely negative. So that isn't something that they keep, but they do keep the kalim, the bride price. Now I'm a very bourgeois gentleman, so of course I have to date a girl from the most expensive province. Now her province is situated very firmly in the desert where they have next to no resources. They pretend they have farms there, but I don't think they do. And her land demands the highest sort of prices. So what might that look like? Well, if you want to date a girl here, you have to make sure you confirm it with the family. And the family is going to tell you, this is the value of my daughter. If you're marrying a nice, charming, perky 20-year-old like me and you're intent for marriage, you would ask, well, what can I do to marry your daughter, sir? And you'd have a very strict Soviet Kyrgyz father-in-law, and he'd come down upon you and say, I was in the Red Army. I know what I'm worth. And I'd say, well, I bet you do. And you would say, well, how much would that be? And his first sentence out of his mouth to me anyway was $40,000. Now, I'm not quite happy to pay $40,000, so I asked him again, what does that mean? And he said, well, I'm in debt right now and would really like to buy a home for my family, so I'll take $40,000, please. And I almost flipped the table at him and beat the shit out of him, but I chose not to. And that's why I'm so successful as I am today. It's that level of patience. So they wanted $40,000. I'll say it again, $40,000. Of course, they highballed me a little bit. They said maybe we could do 10 or a home. You could also buy a home. And they said, on top of that, we'd also like a cow. It's very important that you give the mother a cow as well. It's called milk money. You can also give it in the form of gold if you want, but a cow should suffice. Now, these payments, of course, they probably gave me hyperbolic numbers because I'm a foreigner and they hate foreigners, as they should. I also do. But they might typically pay this in the form of cattle or goats or horses. It's very common for my girlfriend to send me videos on TikTok of people like giving like bridal prices of like a whole herd of horses, like 20 or 30 horses. That's still common today. That's definitely practiced.
Okay. So that whole thing, so her dad is a Red Army veteran.
Oh yeah, dude is like, Putin is coming back to save us. We are going to unify again with Russia, and we're going to expel all the modern progressive foreigners that are here and reclaim our nation. So I picked a good family. He's very nice. I've been told that.
So, okay. So does a foreigner not imbue some sort of status to them? It doesn't do that? Because I know in a lot of Asian countries it does.
We are not a colony of America like the Philippines or South Korea. So no, we don't have that kind of magical power.
It would be true in most of Southeast Asia. I think a lot of like Chinese as well, even.
I don't know. We have an ethnic group here called the Dungans. The Dungans they came over from what region are they from in China? Xinjiang. I guess they came over from Xinjiang as Muslims here many, many, many years ago. I have no idea when. And they're actually specialized builders here. So we have a Dungan Chinese population. They're very well respected, along with North Koreans we have that were shipped over from the Soviets into Uzbekistan.
Dungans aren't Han Chinese, though, aren't they? That's
not my specialty. I don't know. But we got a lot of them, and they're quite pleasant and intelligent. So we do have a Muslim Chinese population who's very successful in the nation as well. But the local people don't really see foreigners as anything special or revelatory. Like my friends in the Philippines, for example, you step outside in the Philippines and, oh my God, the clouds open, the sky, the sun is here, Christ is born. You get that kind of treatment. But here they don't have the same idea of foreigners. They're more concerned that they're going to steal their land like I'd like to do.
Muslim Amish. Yeah, apparently it's not that easy to even buy their land. And yeah, Jay Forte says Sam's a foreigner to me because he's a Yankee, and I agree with that. Okay. So you referred to her as your girlfriend?
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure that sticks, but I don't know. I'm scared as hell about it because honestly, you can find a girl that's very mentally stable and lovely and you can spend all day with her and she can be the most wonderful thing. But there's always that thing in the back of my mind. If I marry into the wrong clan, they're going to send the mafia on me. And I don't like when the mafia is sent on me because I'm not as funny as I used to be and I can't talk my way out of those situations anymore.
Why would they send the mafia on you?
Like that's what happened with this one guy. When I visited this farmer, I guess they just didn't like where his wife was from or the certain region she was a part of. And they just sent a bunch of dudes to try to confiscate his land and threaten him a couple times. So, you can really like a woman and you can pay this bridal price all you want. But if you're going, like, if I want to go to if I want to go to the eastern part of the country on the Chinese border where it's really nice and we have some trees. But if I bring my wife from the west there, am I going to have issues? Are people going to hunt me when I sleep? Are they going to take my land? Are they going to burn down my land? These are things that you have to think about. So this idea of loving someone, that's nice. Is that going to protect you from your neighbors? Is that going to protect you if we have a food supply issue, when our resources are depleted and people are going to start warring with each other? You really have to think strategically about these kind of things.
Okay. So, what's her view on marriage? Because you said you've known her for a few months, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how common is violence in this place? Are there even cops?
Over there, there's a kid. Over there, across the street, there's a kidnapping like 3 years ago. It's very common. No, so they're very peaceful people, I find anyway. I know I just said a bunch of things that would be contrary to you Western folks, but I think they're the most wonderful, loving, little scrumptious folk you can imagine. They're very, very passive, and they're very, very unified, I would suggest. These kind of behaviors that I mentioned would really only happen under the circumstance that one is a foreigner married to a local woman, and you set up in the wrong region. So, for example, my concern for me personally is, let's say when I'm 40 or 50 and I've got my nice real estate empire and my property and my farm and everything's situated and ready to go. If I want to put my farm in the southern region of the country, this is the direct competitor with my girlfriend's province. So I would be certainly of risk of being raided, which is very common here. Again, as someone pointed out, due to the lack of resources. So that would be common, but you have to really watch who you're marrying into. Just because we live, and this is something I've just realized last week, just because I live in a building with electricity does not mean that people are inherently modern. We still have these different kind of tensions that relay. I don't think the people are necessarily used to just behaviorally adapting to this kind of environment yet. It's still very tribal. At least it feels like that to me. And I am wrong in saying that, but that's what it does feel like. It's just tribal people thrown in a city, and they're trying to kind of live with each other in certain respects. Normally, the cities are the green zone, but out in the villages, it's different.
So there's no tribal warfare within the cities?
No, no, no. They live as completely civilized people would be. It's kind of like a green zone. So foreigners here, we are legally allowed to purchase land. So I'll buy a couple of apartments here, and we'll have a rental business. And I'll work in the schools, and everybody's wonderful and perfect and great. They're all, they basically have the same views as normal Americans would, which is we're very against modern medicine, for example. We're very against any restriction or regulation. We don't like the LGBTQ propagandists. We want to be free to exist. And that's why I love the people here. They're all very rugged, and they're very respectful, and everything's wonderful. But it's just out in the villages. I don't know. There's no one that lives here. I mean, there might be 10 foreigners that tried to move here and do this farming scheme like I have. You'll have different colonies, let's say, of a Russian enclave or a German enclave, and they're very successful living out in the frontier. But for me, as an idiot who's moved here wearing the color pink outside with these people, I could be destroyed at any moment. I don't know. And that's the fun part about going on an adventure. You have to figure it out, and there's no one that's going to help you, and you just have to make these choices in a minute, and it's going to define the rest of your life, and that could mean death, and that's okay.
Sweet. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So we already kind of went into this, but you consider them spiritual or religious type people. I mean, you mostly said that it was scrunched by the Soviets.
So in terms of religion, everybody here collectively identifies as Muslim. All right, let's do Muslim Christian binary, and then we'll do the traditional religion, because these are three very different subjects. So we have traditionally the people are Muslim. They were Muslim for the longest time. The history on that I'm not clear about. The Soviets came in.
A lot of steppe tribes converted to Islam. It just happened to work okay for a lot of steppe tribes. A lot of them were also Judaic as well. There were a bunch of
So I guess they were allegedly, what I've heard, the timeline is thus. First, we have something called Tengrianism. Then we maybe have Christianity, and then the Islamic influence took them all. Are you familiar with that religion of Tengrianism? Tengrianism. I don't know how to pronounce it.
No, let's Google that.
Okay. You got no idea how to spell it. Something like Tanger and penguin together. But this particular religion, so my students have told me, this is student information to me, which is always going to be terrible. But they suggested that individuals here used to worship the sky and the ground as their primary gods.
So it's
yes.
shamanism and animism. This is, religions are pretty common to be like this in a lot of I do like to use the word primitive, just meaning that it's there's less social constructs like constructivism adding on to it. So it's closer to just basic. So yeah, animism and shamanism, it's a very overarching term, but it is it can describe most of these early cults. Like, a sky god is something that a lot of you can find in almost any continent, because it's based on fertility coming down from the sky or something. The one thing that I think is interesting is this symbol here, and if you're just listening, they look almost like runes
That's
on
correct.
each side, and then it's like a cross. It's like it's like the same as like a Celtic cross, but it's very similar to a symbol, the Native American medicine wheel, which of course Native Americans would come after, but it's not that it's an extraordinarily complex symbol, but they're both circles split up into four.
Now, I'd like to
Also
interject
similar to
here. We
Islam.
have one researcher on staff who does believe the original Native Americans would be these Mongolian Kyrgyz people who ventured on over there. So that is actually part of what generally is believed here by some academics. They do believe that Kyrgyz tribes or Mongolian tribes did eventually go over to the water. They settled all of America, I guess, and then gave birth to these Native American traditions. Unfortunately, I don't know how to communicate with this one professor very well, but that is someone what someone has told me.
That's interesting. Okay. So I actually do know what this is. Tengri, because this is also freaking. This is this is the Hungarian religion as well. That's interesting because it's. I've heard this term before. It's in a different sort of form, but yeah. So Tengrism. So this is. Wow. Okay. So this is a bunch of different peoples. It's the Gok Turks, the Xi'anbai, the Bulgars, the Xiongnu. I mean, the Xiongnu and the Xi'anbai are like contemporaries of ancient China. It's actually, that's interesting. The Xiongnu is the people. They're a steppe tribe. That's where the story of Mulan comes from originally, very likely. So yeah. So Tengrism. The story of Mulan, something that we have in American culture from the 90s, has a link to this random religion that we just found on Wikipedia.
So in terms of Tengrianism, now we have this this local symbol. It's called a what is it called? Tunduk. It's called a tunduk, which is the top of a yurt. It's this circle-y thing. And then within there we have the runes, of course. Now the runes, that's basically I wouldn't call it a language personally, but it is designated as a language. You have these different symbols. Now, these symbols are really interesting because they're still found in traditional clothing to this day. But every symbol has, of course, it's a pictograph. So it would then represent a different meaning or a different idea, which are typically very rudimentary in symbol. Unfortunately, I can't read those. I think I know my girlfriend really enjoys shaman people that live in the villages. She tried to educate me on those before, but I don't pay attention very well, unfortunately. But that's their original religion. Now, how this worked, and this is very specific. When we talk about the sky god, what I was told is they literally worship the sky. And I mean, they literally worship the ground. It's not a figure. It's literally the ground and the sky, which I found very interesting myself. I know when I lived with like tribes in Vietnam, when I was actually living with real tribes, they had all these fancy stories and things like that. But here it's much more simple.
Huh. Wild.
Yep. So that was our first thing. There might be some Christianity. I've heard someone say that Christians had an influence here at some time. I don't believe them, but that's what I've been told. Then they had Islam. Then they had the Soviet Union. And now they have freedom. Now, what does freedom mean? So in 1991, the wall falls. And the first response of the Western people is not to send aid, but rather to send missionaries. So we have the various members of Christian churches.
Provide aid, though? Most of the
yes,
time?
I'm sure they would. These specific ones I'm referencing are not related to aid. I mean, like not a lot of my friends. I know a couple of guys I'm referencing specifically from the local expat community. They've been here since the wall fell, and they said, all right, we're going to go and we're going to preach Christianity to these people. I know one guy who literally just got in a horse and went off to the mountains. He's lived in the mountains for years, might be by himself, might be with a group, and he's just trying to live with the nomadic people and he's trying to build a school for them related to Christianity. So that's one crazy guy I know. Another guy I know moved over here in, I think, 91 to 96 with his wife, who ironically is from one of my hometowns back in America, which scares the shit out of me. So his wife is from one of my towns I used to live in. And they came here, and the local people, like, they didn't know what economics were, obviously, being nomadic in the Soviet Union. So he actually saw everybody panicking and everything, there's famines and everything's horrible. So he's actually said, well, all right, I'm going to try to convert them to Christianity, but I'm going to teach them about business. So he taught some people how to do trading. I mean, they know how to do trading, but how to, things related to money and how to run a business and how to operate a business. That was kind of his way to educate and convert people to Christianity through that way. So we've got a couple of these really weird Christian evangelist sorts that are in here. And we actually have a Christian school as well. But I think that's only about 9 to 12% of the population.
Kyrgyzstan. Oh, no, it's not that. It's just I want to keep hearing you say more things, but I've run out of things to ask about. We got any questions people have in the comments?
Now, again, I really would like to suggest this is the most boring thing I've done in my life at all. I mean, I used to be in the jungle in Vietnam. I rode through the entire country on motorcycle. That was much more interesting than working here in the dystopian regions.
Yeah,
Mostly,
but
I'm just
the motorcycle ride through Vietnam, I mean, Top Gear did that, right? It's yeah, I get that's probably more dangerous, but it's much closer to like our understanding. Central Asia is just it's
oh,
the edge of the world. It's it's not like people don't have a lot of frame of reference for this place, and I have a little bit. I have more than most people.
I see.
Um,
So I'm just curious because this is all very normal for me. So would you still suggest that Western people in itself have no idea anything about this region, and it would be very unusual for someone to say, pick this region on the map and say, this is the best place in the world for me to live, and go there like I did? Is that strange?
yeah, yeah,
I
it's
never thought
fucking
of it
weird,
that way.
dude. It's really weird. It's weird. You could, Thailand, Costa Rica, Mexico City, and you
Ugh.
want to go to frickin' Kyrgyzstan where there's like 12 white people, which, I get it. It's fine. It's
Well, this place is really good for expats to move to. I would actually highly suggest if you're a more conservative, you want to completely avoid Southeast Asia, very much avoiding East Asia and even South America. Now, this is good for a conservative gentleman to come to because the local people are very based as the normal colloquial perspective of based. That's how they all think. They don't like the government. I know my girlfriend's dad, for example, we have revolutions here all the time. And I don't know the facets of these revolutions, but they always try to overthrow the government. They have a great time with it. And my girlfriend's region, again, very crazy. They staged an organization where they were trying to overthrow the government at least 2 or 3 times in the past couple of years. And they literally go into the Soviet White House. They did build a White House here. They went into the Soviet White House, and I was told they just started taking politicians by the neck and throwing them out in the streets. I mean, these people do not about. And I respect that. And when I saw that, I said, these people are as radical as I am. I'd really like to be introduced to their ways. I would never possibly be able to integrate with them. But I have great respect for their ability to say, you know what? Actually, no, we're going to do whatever we want. And if anybody comes in and tries to fuck with us, we will destroy them. And it's that kind of collective revolutionary spirit, the same my ancestors had when we came over on the Mayflower, that I genuinely find to be unknown to the rest of the world. To just go in to the White House, we had this thing with the event that shall not be mentioned publicly because we're on YouTube, and people go walk around like it's a parade. Here we rip them out by their necks, and I appreciate that. I'm not saying to overthrow the government. I quite like the government that we have at this current juncture of time, but they can do that. And this sort of spirit is the spirit of humanity before we were cucked by these modern systems. And I will always appreciate the locals for maintaining their rugged ability to survive and to mold the world to their will.
all right. Sweet. Okay. So we got a bunch of comments, and some of them I really love, and I'm glad like you guys know exactly what I want to ask and then I forget about. Yeah, dude. No, that's great. Modern world kind of blows. I just don't have as much balls as you, I guess.
Dude, I would like to say again, I am a pussy. I am the radical
I'm not
leftist
sure
of my
about that.
friends. A majority of my friends live without any electricity in various jungles scattered throughout the world. I was actually ousted from most of my friendship communities just because I use electricity. So I am the most left-wing person you can imagine. And that is a real thing that I think about a lot.
Okay, man. All right. Okay. I was joking recently that I'm so conservative that I would call Ronald Reagan a liberal.
I
But
call him a communist personally, but sure, we can use liberal.
okay, there we go, man. Yeah. So apparently the Overton window is shifted quite a bit for you, and it makes sense based on your environment. So we've got yeah. So how Americanized are the people? Do they listen to Cardi B? You mentioned TikTok earlier, so I did want to know about that. What do they
So
listen
let's talk
to?
about trading. Who wants to talk about trading? I do, class. So now, how we use social media is just as you might in America, but it's a little bit different. Now, our economy in the billions of dollars mostly comes from bazaars. So bazaars being like these big trading centers. You shop on Amazon. We go to the local babushka to buy from her directly here. Most of our goods come over from China. They're sold in these giant bazaar things. And then what we do is we also trade goods based on TikTok and Instagram. So we have a completely mercantile culture from the time spent in the
I'm sorry,
Silk
wait a
Road.
minute. You trade goods on TikTok and Instagram?
Yes, most of the local businesses are run through TikTok and Instagram. That's correct.
What? How do you run a business through TikTok? What does that mean?
I'm glad you asked. I don't know. But for example, right, I have to buy, now back to sorry, I have to jump around a lot. For my marriage negotiations, the father agreed. He said, all right, fine. You can marry my daughter as long as you own property. And I said, great, we can do that. So I have to buy a house for her. Now, this house that we get to live in, great. How do we shop for a house? Well, we have to go on TikTok and we start scrolling through until we find a real estate company that can sell me a home. Or if you want, hold on, it gets, all right, if you have a housewife, let's say you have a wonderful, charming housewife, she's got to work, of course. You can't just let a mercantilistic person sit at home all day. So what do? You give your wife a business running, sewing clothes at her home and selling the clothing. And you're going to give her an Instagram account so she can sell those clothing. That's how most people use social media here, in my opinion.
All right. So what was your girlfriend doing on TikTok then? Because you mentioned she was on TikTok.
Yes. Well, she just uses it like everyone.
Oh, so you also use it as just.
Yeah, we use it as entertainment, but I'm saying culturally, we have this mercantile element, and it's seen as most businesses run on TikTok and Instagram, especially. And people sell anything. I mean, it's really incredible. It's another thing I admire. It's a deeply bartering society. So buying and trading happens on these apps all the time, and I'd say that's probably going to become a large portion of our economy.
Wow. All right. That's very interesting. What's the situation with drugs and alcohol? I'm wondering about that as well. What's the drink of choice? And also, is there any indigenous drugs? What's going on with
Sure.
that?
Let me send you let me go back to my messages here from the other days. If you'll look on my timeline here for Twitter, I made a post about this recently for the drink of choice. I said, while you go on dates to Starbucks and sip your sugar, I get drunk off horse milk with my girls. Your girlfriends know only diabetes, while mine know only adventure. And it is a picture of my girl sending me that she wants to get drunk off of horse milk. So that's pretty normal.
Is that?
That's real. Yeah, no, that's for sure.
Do they have beer?
What is it? The Bureau of Tourism tried to promote horse milk as like this new thing for tourists to come in. We used it as like a ploy to get more foreigners to come and spend money. So I'd say horse milk is something very popular. They also give it to you when you go to certain restaurants. They give it in little shot glasses. So you sit down, you shot your horse milk, and then you get right to the meal afterwards. We have a lot of traditional drinks like that. We have some drinks made from horse milk, from corn, different kinds of milks. What's really cool about our economy is we're mostly agrarian. So everything on paper would appear to be organic and natural and made by a variety of local farmers scattered throughout the steppe plains.
Would this be a good place to be a passport bro?
That's an exceptionally good question. You're correct. The idea of being a passport pro, this is extremely important. We think of passport pros typically as the old perverted man who goes over to the Philippines and to Thailand to get ladyboys. At least that's my opinion of them. Now, what one should do instead, and this is something I'm very interested in, I do not work for American corporations, and I don't work remotely. I work with the local people of every country I go to with locally owned businesses. Now, this is important because what I do is I fully acclimate to their culture to the best I can. I'm working on the ground with local people, and I'm earning basically a Western salary as well due to my connections. And anybody can do this sort of thing where you can find a local organization and work for them on the ground. I find the West to be entirely too progressive for me. And so if you're a conservative-minded individual, what I would suggest is you select a nation that is of value to you, try to find a way you can position to work yourself on the ground, begin to work here, marry into a local, learn the language and the traditions, buy land, and you can develop a new life for yourself. That's certainly something I would advise for a conservative-minded passport bro. Primarily, what I would suggest is if you are an individual looking to go overseas, you have to be very conscious of where you're choosing. I know my journey primarily began over in Southeast Asia. Originally, after I finished up my bachelor's degrees in philosophy, communications, I was focused on comedy at the time. Funny enough, I began not as an educator, but as a comedian. doing different kinds of vlogs and video productions. And as a comedian, I thought it'd be the funniest thing in the world, just a darling trip, if I might go live in a jungle for a period of time and become a kind of vlogger or documentary producer out there when I lived in the jungles in Vietnam for some time. And what I found interesting about this particular nation was I love the freedom that you could have. There, if you go out to the national parks, most of the parks are still places where some of the tribes there run freely. And I used to frequent them quite often. Sure, you live in a little upscale homestay. It might not be exactly roughing it, but you live in one of their own log turtle home constructions or sort of thing. And you really get a taste for that rural life. And it's not something I find that can be possible to have in America. And once I started living with these tribal people here, understanding their ways, their mentality, how they'd been scorned by the modern world, seeing how my own nation of America had been harmed by the modern world, I decided this is something I might like to do for the remainder of my existence. I then went back home, got the qualifications necessary to begin once more to invest in these foreign nations and live with foreign people. But when it comes out to finding a place you want to live, it could be quite difficult. For example, I love to live out there in the jungles of Vietnam. I miss it every day. I have flashbacks every day of how much fun I used to have with the Thai Dan, the Hmong, so many different options of people to live with. But what's unfortunate about living out here in foreign nations is you can't buy land, and land must always be the thing that you are focused on, because they have different ethnic groups in these places. There's always some kind of tension, and you can never necessarily trust that everything's going to be running smoothly. You need to be as self-sufficient as possible, as quick as possible. A blitzkrieg to stability, as my friends have said. So unfortunately, despite how much I loved Vietnam and would love to live there, I can't, because we don't have land ownership rights. The best you can do is lease land from the government for about 99 years. So what you need to do if you're interested in moving overseas is you find a nation that not only represents your values by the common man, but also allows you certain rights. The only right I'm interested in myself is the idea of land ownership. As you heard about, it's very complicated. The government might just take it away from you after you buy it. But typically what you would do is you'd marry into a local woman, try to accept her tradition as much as you can, and you would buy land and real estate and develop a business on the ground by yourself. Now, in our nation, it's very common to be a trader. That I would say is the number one career profession, doing some kind of trading business. You might want to pick a country like this, where you don't have to work online in America. You can actually come on the ground. You can open up your own sort of trading business. Maybe you want to trade local goods to overseas people like in America. You could take an agricultural product. You could start trading this within the local community and send it over to Europe now that there's a gap. There's a lot of different options to come overseas and choose a country, but of primary interest, you want to make sure you can have some kind of business on the ground. You want to make sure that you can get citizenship, even though it may be very difficult. You want to make sure that you can marry into a local woman successfully without too much difficulty, and that you have the ability to have land rights. That was my base 4 criteria for any human being that wants to replicate more of my rugged lifestyle, and what I would suggest to you as well. Though, I was educating the people on how to move overseas successfully and select a nation.
Yeah, I heard a lot of it. It's really rough for a lot of people. A lot of most Americans, I think, what do they go to? Like 17 states in their whole life. Like most don't leave the country. It's hard for people. It's such a most people aren't going to do it. But if you want to, man, I mean that's awesome. You can be happy doing it. The food. Yeah, Fabian asks.
As you see, my eyes already twitching. Yeah, I don't like to eat food in general. That's my least favorite thing. I hate the idea of sleeping, waking up, and eating food. It's a waste of time in my mind. But the food here is just, I don't know. I mean, we have so few things that we make. I mean, we have this kind of dumpling. It's called a manti. Manti is just a steamed dumpling with, it's like fat and beef or fat and horse meat. Horse meat is very popular.
Yeah, horse meat, right?
Yep. So our national dish is besh barmak. Besh barmak is called 5 fingers or something like that. And you have a bunch of wet noodles and you pick them up together with horse meat and you mix them about with your hands and eat it. My girlfriend all the time, she's so annoying. Every time I tell her, oh my God, we should go horseback riding. Or, oh my God, it'd be so nice if we got married and then had horses for the children. She's like, no, honey, we can't have horses. I'll eat them. Ha ha ha. Oh, God. So can't even do that. But yes, she really likes to eat horse meat. That's her favorite. That's quite common here. It's a little
Do they
sour.
ride the same horses they eat?
I don't know. I mean, they might.
Do you eat horse meat?
Yeah, it's whatever. I mean, I don't know as a rule, I try never to know what I'm eating. That's a
Right.
bad idea. Now, I made this rule when I used to live in the Chinese border with the folks up there in the jungle because they have a bunch of dog farms out there on the Chinese border. They're always in bamboo cages being transported on a motorcycle. And I realized that I'd probably eaten dogs several times in my life, and I try not to remember. So I don't
Okay.
ever want to know.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, you would have a different reaction to that than me. Okay. What Alone in the Woods asked, so what kind of qualifications would you need to do this? I don't know exactly what he was referring to. It was probably
Mhm.
something that you were saying, but that did prompt me to think about another question that I had, which was like, when you're talking about trading, like, how is, if everyone's trading each other, how does anybody make any money?
I don't know how these people make money. Most people live off. I know my girl's family has got about 5 people in it: 2 parents, working father, stay-at-home mother. He's a mechanic. He actually used to be a bean seller. Not to brag, marrying into a bean selling family, kind of cool. And yeah, they live off about $500 a month for all 5 of them. So the margins are pretty.
Subsistence, herding, or something?
No. They can live. You can live very successfully off just about $500 a month here. That's really about all you need to
Five
support a
hundred
family
dollars a
of
month
5. Yeah. I'm a little
in an
bit bourgeois.
entirely market-based economy. They're not making no chickens or anything.
We actually don't have chickens. That's our biggest export. But mostly so how our economy functions specifically is we have mostly we produce agrarian products here. So you can think of it as like the only all organic on paper state where we have honey and we have, what's our big thing? Honey, cotton, tobacco. We make clothing still in the south, like Batken. And then we'll export these to different nations. So mostly we'll make local products. We'll sell them out to Kazakhstan or Russia. Russia's a good friend of ours. We'll do with China, with Germany. Germany's increased buying things from Kyrgyzstan now that the Russians they're not legally allowed to trade with them. So mostly it's agrarian products. But I would suggest looking up a bazaar. That might be something to pique your interest.
Yeah, it
Moving
would.
through that, we have a
What about
couple of different ones here.
goat and lamb?
Mhm.
Ooh, that looks like one. What about goat and lamb?
Yeah, that's I'd say something that the people consume quite often. Beef, goat, lamb. Of course, we would never have pork here, being Muslim on paper. But yeah, all
Right.
these things are quite normal. So instead of going on Amazon, right, we go down to the bazaar every day and we start buying and haggling over different produce. We've got a lot of nuts here. The walnut was originally from Kyrgyzstan. Apples as well.
Oh, look
Um,
at this guy.
mhm.
How nice is that?
Yeah, so that's something you would see. That's from Osh Bazaar in the west of Bishkek.
And if you're just listening, it's just a Kyrgyz man, and they kind of look like a mix of white and Asian people. A lot of them,
Mhm.
right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I personally I like to identify them as a joke as the last true Aryan people,
Yeah.
because they have this blend of that's we're called Eurasia, so that's what we do,
Right.
and that's another
Right.
reason why you might be interested in moving over here because you can actually integrate into the population being a white person. There's a bunch of Russians. We live very peacefully with the Kyrgyz and the Germans as well. And I think this is really the perfect place to integrate for an American person that looks like you or I.
Really. Hmm. Interesting.
Hmm.
Gosh,
So
so
yeah,
many colors. All these
yeah, our
spices
traditional
and
clothing
everything.
is very colorful as well. But yeah, you've got the typical yeah, this is how you would go shopping every day, normal stuff.
Yeah, a bunch of dried fruits and different things.
Oh,
It
that's our.
reminds
You know
me of
what? That's
hey,
actually. You asked about drinks. That's our drink. We have stot. What is it called? It's so they take these dried fruits and they press them to get juice out of them, and that's what they make. I
oh, that's
forget what it's
awesome.
called. It's not
Fermented?
hummus. Yeah, it's fermented. It's fermented dried fruit. That's like the main thing. I love it here. I get it all the time. It's escaping me now. I can only think of hummus, which is like our horse milk drink, I think, or corn. It's all gross. But yeah, I mostly just cook for myself. I mean, after I was living in Vietnam, I hated the food there so much. I just couldn't. I just refused to eat out as much as I can. But the food here mostly is actually, I find anyways, Korean. We have a huge Korean influx here. The history of that's very unique as well. And I usually eat at Korean places actually. That's
Huh.
something most comfortable to me. Back in I guess the World War I or II, we had a bunch of Japanese islands that Korea used to own, and then Russia picked them up, and then we sent the Koreans over here. I know some of my clients that I work with trying to learn English, their families were doctors in North Korea that went to Vladivostok and to Moscow and then down to here. So that is typically who I would hang out with for food anyway.
Wow. Well, it's incredible. Okay. So Kyrgyzstan, moose, fermented mare's milk.
That's very popular.
It's interesting that they still drink it. Well, it's not that interesting. It makes complete sense that they would still drink it, even though they're not nomadic.
Let's talk about why that would be a normal thing. So what is a definition of a horse? You in the West may have a very different definition. A horse to us is deer. Okay, we don't have animals that live in the steppe for the most part. I did see a snow leopard a couple weeks ago. That was great. Yay. But mostly we just have horses roaming around, or like bighorn sheep. So when we see a horse, think of it like a deer for you, where you would go out, you would hunt it, you'd bring it home, and you'd eat it. So that's mostly
It's not really like a deer in the sense that they're domesticated by not domesticated, but they're because they're a herded animal. They're not a wild animal.
No,
I mean, some of them
we have wild horses here. They're very abundant.
Yeah, but that's not where the horse meat is coming from, right? They're not going out and hunting the horses to get the horse meat.
That's how it would have started, of course. But yeah, it is very common. If you go to a village, you'll see a bunch of wild horses running around. So I like to think of them as deer.
Yeah, just not in the context of the meat. Not, I mean, it's no judgment. I get it, but it's a different thing.
As you can see here, most of my life is coping, right? I'm like, how can I relate this to America so I don't go insane? How can I relate it to America so I don't go insane?
Well, that's the thing. It's like it's so out of your normal frame of reference. It's like a pervasive culture shock. I mean, I don't know. Do you think you'll ever fully assimilate?
Of course. I teach classes on this all the time. I think Kyrgyz tradition and American tradition is very similar. You have this idea of you have your community, you have your tribe, you've got the Puritans in America, you got the Quakers. Okay, we're going to come over in our group and we're going to produce everything that we can. We're going to go to a random spot on the earth. We're going to try to order it into a space that enables us to produce with maximum efficiency. This might work, this might not work, but we have our own principles. We're dying on those principles. We're living in the frontier. Okay, that makes sense to me. That's very similar.
I mean, I'm fully with you, but that's very 19th century American, and I am very much 20th century Limp Bizkit suburbs America. So I didn't grow up like that. I grew up with freaking air conditioning. I'm a little pussy,
Hey, my dad's a plumber. I had some nice air conditioning units myself. But no, I grew up mostly as when I was in high school, I went to a special agrarian school. So I was an alpaca farmer mostly and a butcher.
Okay. I mean, you're still, of course, living in like a normal house. It's like, it's a massive shock. It's a massive difference. That's only to say that it's it'll work for a certain number of people, but it's so foreign and so different, I think, to most Americans that, I mean, the evidence is that there aren't that many people doing it.
Well, that's what I'd like to try to revive here. The reason I try to live with clans or tribes or whatever that you can classify with my normal people. I'm very interested in trying to rebirth this sort of Mennonite Amish asceticism. I think this would enable a flourishing again of people. We don't need to build more skyscrapers. We need to be able to grow our own foods and live self-sufficiently. We always have to rely on the government for something. Well, what if we didn't need to? What if we could be like the Amish? What if we could actually go back to how we used to live with our own communities that were able to produce their own goods? So I'm trying to figure out how to do that in a way that modern people like yourself might enjoy. Not everybody can be like my friends and they give up everything and they just go live in the jungle in bamboo huts. Now, I think what's interesting is, and what I'm trying to do, I know even my friends who live in huts, they have Starlink actually. So they can live as far as possible out in the jungle, but they have Starlink that works now. So I'm thinking, there we go. That's an idea. So we have this idea of you can make most everything on your homestead, but you can also somehow still be tied into the internet now. And that's something I'm trying to work with. So one day, that's what my Twitter journey is all about, finding this way to have modern man comfortably enough go back into this more frontier community sense base of living so that we can one day again become free. And I don't know how to do that, but I will invent it.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about some other considerations.
Hmm.
What do you see like in the next few decades in Kyrgyzstan? Like, is there any sort of threat of Russian or Chinese or domestic turmoil, or maybe even from Turkmenistan or one of the other
Oh,
countries
Turkmenistan's
there?
way too far. No, no, they'd
No,
never
no,
come
well,
back here.
whatever.
So, talking
Uzbekistan,
about the future,
Kazakhstan.
I am horribly afraid because yesterday I woke up and our government, what did we do? Oh my God, the Rothschilds. They took loans yesterday from the Rothschilds bank. Oh my heaven on earth. This is terribly concerning. Now we're going to be in debt to people, and we know what debt makes people act like. So I'm a little concerned that we might be too modern. But at the same time, the government's also throwing all of the LGBTQ journalists in prison. So I have this one thing where I'm like, ooh, that sounds like Western interference. But then they have this other thing where they're like, all right, anybody who's not traditional, go into prison. You, go into prison. You, go into prison. You, I don't like how you're looking. Go into prison. So they're doing this great movement on one half where culturally and from the government, they're on the same page. We are going to keep our people traditional conservative. You are not going to touch us and taint our culture. But also, we've got a lot of foreign actors coming in here now. So I'm more interested in the following scenario. We have a nation who has a very confused identity, bordered by China, influenced by Russia, friends with Kazakhstan, friends with Islam, and ties to America. Now, what this is makes an ideological battleground. So my presupposition is, as the world begins to degenerate and collapse by, let's say, my friends in the World Economic Forum, for example, as we begin to globalize, I think Central Asian individuals are going to be this hot spot where it's fought over, not in a land war, but an ideological war between the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans, and that's going to allow us to be safe in a way. We'll be the trading partner rather than the one participating in a sort of war. That's my hope. I'm wrong, but that's my hope.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing with geopolitics. It's that it's all so exceptionally complicated, and it's full of so many different factors that it's really impossible to tell with any effectiveness what's going to happen. At least any degree of certainty, I think.
Well, I personally stopped believing in independent nations long ago. I talk about them like they exist, but only in the frame of reference of ghosts. My contention is about the global political sphere is that everybody's owned by the same group of people, and we're just doing a song and dance pretending we have sovereign nations. So
Yeah,
that bothers me.
yeah. Well, the way I think about them is of course that they're not real in the sense that they're not tangible. Like it's not H2O. It's not a genetic structure. It's something that exists as a myth in the sense that it exists because we believe in it. And they're more discreet than people give them credit for because you have a system where there are competing there's competing jurisdictions between local, state, federal governments, and now, like we have for a long time, there's supernatural structures in the sense of something like the European Union, and then there's global structures as well that have certain powers, and the powers that they have are written down, but that written down is just theory. It's only that as long as people believe it's that, and as long as people keep acting within it. So yeah, I see what you're saying, and it's
I just
I
found it
think that
very unusual back in 2020. This is completely when I decided to change my life. I'm living on the Chinese border, and I hear of this pandemic thing. And over the years, I thought it was very interesting how every country decided to do the same thing at the same time without any interference whatsoever. And it seemed to me that it was of the immediate importance not to rely on these modern systems, which all seem strangely controlled and doing the same thing, but rather to escape that and find an alternative. And that may require living with less, but I would much prefer to live on less on my own terms than to cede my individual agency to any foreign nation or foreign rulers of a foreign nation, fictitious or literal otherwise. So that's been my focus, trying to get away from that.
yeah, it's I'm not sure if you can ever really get away from that, but it's you're more likely to get away from it more in Kyrgyzstan than in Eastern Connecticut, smack dab between Boston and New York.
Hey, at least you guys have beautiful trophy wives there, right? Can't have everything,
That's
but you
Western.
can't have a trophy wife.
That is Western Connecticut. That is not me.
Yeah, I used to live over in Long Island for some time. We used to be right across the Sound. I only dated one girl from Connecticut once. Did not go very well, so I don't have a good opinion of the people there. But I tried my best.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think with that, I think we should end on that. That's about an hour and a half.
I like the American frontier aesthetic. I like living on the frontier. I would prefer if I could find a way to revive the American frontier, take modern people away from the tyranny of progress, always needing to produce something higher, greater, further. Oh my God, we need more electronics. No, we don't. We need to re-encourage our people, much like we did in World War II, to grow our own food so that we can be free and independent as much as we can to the best of our abilities. This is the core of revitalizing our nation and being able once again to identify as free people, moving away from all of these modern temptations. It is illusion. And this, if we can band together to reject, is the pathway forward for me and my writing anyway.
JC has a question. Has Rogue ever thought about living in Alaska? And
No, I do not step in. Now, this is another thing about me. I do not step in any nation or any region that has a, let's say, jab rate of over 30%. I do not trust any individuals who are compromised. Alaska's at 83%, far too high for me. I could make hundreds of thousands of dollars teaching in rural schools that are subsidized by our government. I don't touch these people. So no. Anything with a divorce rate higher than 50%, I don't touch as a nation. Anything higher than a jab rate of 30%, anything that doesn't allow rural people to successfully frolic off into nature without taxation, I cannot be around. These are my standards that I have as a gentleman and a scholar.
Patreon is $2 a month while I build content, and if you get in now, you'll be grandfathered in for the future forever.